Before any air operations, a helicopter takes off and is on station to pick up pilots that might have to ditch. Pilots are manning their planes. During winter, when the sea temperature was below 60 degrees, pilots wore exposure suits to prevent hypothermia in case of having to bail out or ditch in the water. The plane captain is assisting me while getting into the cockpit. He hands me the maps, the target photos, and helps adjust the shoulder straps. On these two planes taxiing out, observe these bombs underneath the wings. These planes are F9F Panthers, the Navy's premier carrier jet during the Korean War. The Panthers are catapulted off the Phil C. Notice the 47 painted up forward on the flight deck.
It's November 25th, 2019, and we're in Ready Room 4 aboard CV-12 Hornet with Dale Berven. Dale flew the F9F Panther and Cougar during the Korean War. Dale, I've been thinking of this interview for years. It was the invitation to your birthday party that finally told me it's time to do this. And so I gave you a phone call the other day. I learned some more stories from you the other day. And as you know, I'm the quiet reserve type. I love aviation and history, and I'd like to get some stories from you. So, first off, could you give us a little bit of your life leading up to flight training? You were raised in the Bay Area, you went through high school, and then?
Yeah, I went to San Leandro High School, graduated in January of '48, and at that time, we had to register for the draft. 2 years later, in 1950, the Korean War started. And I did not want to get drafted. I was going to San Francisco State College. And so I signed up for the Navy Reserve Squadron at NAAS, that's Naval Air Auxiliary Station at Oakland, at the Oakland Airport. And I was there. One day, and I was so naive, I didn't know what I was doing, but we were a weekend warrior. I went in there one time, and I remember a pilot from our squadron came out and said, does anybody want to go for an airplane ride? I'd never been in an airplane. So lo and behold, what was he going to fly? A TBM torpedo bomber. And so I got in, I'm down in the bowels of the torpedo bomber, flying around. I come back. When I went home, I saw my folks, and I said, guess what? I went for a ride in an airplane, and I really like it. So, a buddy of mine who was also in the reserves, we signed up for Naval NAVCAD, Naval Aviation Cadet Program. I got accepted. He didn't get accepted because he was colorblind. So, during football season, it was in around September of 1950 that I got the notice that I had been selected for NAVCAD training, and so I was to report down there in January of 1951. And that's when I became a NAVCAD, and I got my wings in April of '52. In the advanced training down in Pensacola, I was flying the F9F Grumman Hellcat, which was one of the best fighter planes during World War II in the Pacific. It was a great plane to fly. After getting my wings, I went ahead and had jet training in Kingsville, Texas, and then I was assigned to the Pacific Fleet, went to San Diego, and they assigned me to the Squadron VF-91, the Red Lightning Squadron, and this is the designation right here. And I thought, well, I would not be sent to Korea right away. They had already been training. Now this was in September, and in December we went aboard the Phil C, went over to Korea. So that was my lead up. I had flown the F9F Hellcat in training, and then in jet training down in Kingsville I was flying the Navy's version of the F-80 Shooting Star. That was the TV-1 and the TV-2. And then when I came to Alameda in VF-91, we were flying the Grumman F9F Panther jet, which was basically the best Navy jet during that time.
Now, can I quickly ask you, you flew both the original F9F with the straight wings, the Panther, and the F9F Cougar that had the swept wings. Mm-hmm. Did you fly them both in Korea? Did you notice any, considerable improvements between the features of the handling of the swept wing versus the straight wing? Or were they actually very similar? Or moderately similar?
They were somewhat similar because the cockpit was basically the same with a few additions. I enjoyed flying the Panther more than the Cougar. And the reason for that being, when you're at high altitude and it's sort of hazy out, peripheral vision, I could see the wingtip tanks out here, and so if I could see the horizon, I'd know I was in balanced and level flight. Whereas on the Cougar, the swept wing version, going back that way, you couldn't see your wings. And there was a chance that you could get a little bit of vertigo thinking you're flying in level flight and you might be in a skid or something like that. The Cougar was definitely faster than the Panther, but coming aboard aircraft carrier, to me, it didn't matter. They both were about the same.
Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, and actually we're basically approaching Korea now. Or did you do sorties at night?
During that time, we had another squadron coming aboard that were night fighters. We had taken off when it was still dark early in the morning, and occasionally we might come back at dusk time. But no, we were not night fighters. We didn't train to be night fighters, just that squadron had been.
Okay, now again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I'm being led into other areas that just intrigue me. The F9F is a fighter designation, and the F9F had 4 20mm cannon in the nose. It could also, I read, carry up to 2,000 pounds worth of bombs, and it also had 6 hard points for unguided rockets, and I believe they were the 5-inch rockets. Were there times that you were, dare I say it, in a fighter mode, or were you doing mostly taking out targets on the ground?
Okay, and during Korea, the Navy's pilots' primary type of missions that we had were to support the troops on the ground. The Air Force F-86 Sabres took care of the MiGs. The Air Force did have others that did close air support like we did. But we had about 9 different types of missions, such as a strike where you were given a primary target. And getting back to the ordnance, we always had 800 rounds of 20 millimeter on our 4 guns. We could carry 6 250-pound bombs. We also could carry, or we would carry rockets. We did not carry missiles. Missiles didn't start in until Vietnam. And that brings up another story about what did Navy ships, Navy pilots have to be concerned with. We had to be concerned with all forms of anti-aircraft guns, small arms, machine guns, heavy artillery, and what have you. Very few Navy pilots in Korea ever saw an enemy aircraft. Yes, we did have a couple that shot down MiGs or some other type of plane, but no, we did the strikes. We had photo escorts. We had close air support. There was 2 types of close air support. There was one where you were supporting the troops on the ground, and then at that time we had the Cherokee close air support, and the Cherokee close air support was named after the admiral who was a full-blooded Cherokee engine. And what you were doing, you were taking out the supplies beyond their troops. So in one of them, you were right down on the front lines trying to take out personnel, and on the Cherokee, you were behind them a little bit, taking out their supplies, storage of ammunition. And then you had the armed reconnaissance, where you were given a major highway or railroad tracks, and you would fly at fairly low altitudes looking for targets of opportunity. And unfortunately, many of the targets of opportunity came out to be ox carts. Yeah, we can laugh. I remember I sent a letter to the Episcopal priest, the church I went to in San Leandro, saying, I have difficulties on going in and firing at some poor farmer in his ox cart. However, that is one way that they transported their ammunition. And he sort of came back and says, Dale, do what you have to do. And hopefully, if it's just a guy out there with no ammunition, that you will miss. But if he's carrying ammunition, hopefully you will blow it up. So,
and it's part of war.
War is not fun. War is hell.
Okay, now I'm not a naval aviator, and I'm a green kid, but I believe there's a term of going feet dry when you're coming over the coast and going inland. About how far inland would either your typical missions go or, say, a long mission? About how far inland would you go?
Well, if you ever see the movie Bridges of Toko-Ri, I looked on the maps for North Korea, and those things were inland quite a ways. It's not so much the distance as it is the time factor and your fuel consumption. On the Panther and on the Cougar, at those times, we did not have in-flight refueling. And now they do that. And so when we came back, we always strive to have at least 800 pounds of fuel when we got into our traffic pattern to land aboard. Because for every time you had to take a wave off because the deck was not cleared for you, every wave off in the Panther was about usually 200 pounds of fuel. Well, about you come in and you have to take a wave off. Okay, so you were at 800. Now you're going to be at 600. You come around again, and lo and behold, you have to take another wave off because they haven't cleared it. Now, something starts puckering on you. You're down to about 400 pounds of fuel. And the task force was approximately 100 miles off of the coast of Korea. You figure you're going to have to use fuel to get back to emergency landing. And that's what the determining factor was, the fuel.
So that brings up two more questions that I had. Well, kind of a little bit. Well, what was like a typical flight duration, or forgive me, a sortie duration?
About an hour and a half.
About an hour and a half. And what sort of range outbound might you have in that hour and a half? I think you're doing maybe, 400-ish knots or so, or... That's been too long.
Yeah.
Okay, but that also brought up another question that I had in here, was either alternate or emergency landing fields and alternates to the carrier. Were there places that you knew that you could land on in like South Korea or in friendly territories? Did they brief you on that?
Below the bomb line, there was a auxiliary field called King 18. King is the phonetic thing for K, so Korea 18 or King 18. By the way, this is where the ROKs, the Republic of Korea pilots, flew out of, and guess what? They were flying P-51 Mustangs. A funny, interesting story there. I had to land there probably about 7 or 8 times, not because I was shot up, but I escorted somebody back that got hit. But also, occasionally the task force would get caught into a fog bank and they couldn't bring us aboard, so we had to land at King 18. I saw one of the P-51 Mustangs below the cockpit had several American flags painted on it, because the pilots in the ROKs were former Japanese pilots, and the guy must have shot down several American aircraft. So anyhow, this was a Marston Manning, and it was below the bomb line or the front lines.
Wow. Okay, so I'm skipping around a little bit here because you're answering some of the questions I had, but here I'm going to go back to this one we talked a little bit about before the camera got started. But all of your I call them launches,
missions.
All of your missions, you launched from a hydraulic catapult. And they were, I understand, a very substantial kick in the butt.
Yeah, I hated every catapult. Jets had to be catapulted off. Propeller-driven aircraft can deck launch. They wind their engines up and they get enough lift. Whereas the jets, the buildup is very slow. And so they're catapulted off. And I hated every catapult shot because you're hanging on for dear life. You're at the mercy of the catapult. At that time was hydraulic driven, compressed air pushing the hydraulic and putting a cylinder forward. Now they have steam catapults, which is a steady thing. In fact, I never was catapulted by a steam cat, so I can't give you the comparison, but I know, like I said, I hated every catapult shot. One of them, the plane captain had failed to circulate the seat up and down by hydraulic pressure, and when I got catapulted off, the seat started coming up, and my head is sticking out over the canopy. Now I'm having 120 miles an hour blowing into my face, and I'm hanging on the stick, and I'm trying to get down. It was very uncomfortable. But
now, if I may, that brings up another thing that, yes, you mentioned when we were talking on the phone the other night. The F9F did not have a ejection seat, and you were launching, I hope that's the right term, with an open canopy.
We had an ejection seat.
You did have an ejection seat.
Yeah, we always took off or landed with an open canopy, even if you were on a land base. However, the ejection seat, we were not to use that below 800 feet.
It wasn't a 0-0 like they are now.
No, now they can launch at 0-0.
Yeah.
We had to be up over 800 feet.
Yeah. And another variation of that, you've heard of fly-by-wire, and in today's nomenclature, that's typically flying by computer. Mm-hmm. But the F9F did not have hydraulic flight controls. It was all controlled by wire cables.
I think so.
Not quite sure, but yeah, probably. There's hydraulics in the landing gear. And maybe speed brake. I'm sure you had a speed brake.
Oh yeah, we had speed brakes. The Cougar did have like power steering that you would have in cars. More so than the Panther jet.
Okay, so that could be like a hydraulic assist.
Yeah.
Okay, now this one, I do know that you've had experience with. Straight deck versus angled deck carriers. When you're coming back from a mission on a straight deck carrier, you're approaching the stern of the aircraft the stern of the carrier on final, and you see all those aircraft on the bow of the ship on a straight deck carrier. And forgive me, I would think there would be a certain pucker factor to that, as opposed to an angled deck carrier where you see ocean in front of you.
I cannot give a comparison because I never landed on an angled deck.
You never landed on an angled deck?
All of my carrier landings, I had 172 of them, and 192, excuse me, and they were all straight deck. You're concentrating on the LSO. You see those planes up there, but the thing is, this is change of pace a little bit. In 2011, my son and I flew to Hawaii and boarded the Ronald Reagan because my grandson was a crewman on the Ronald Reagan, and they have what they call the Tiger Cruise. When the ship is coming back, they can invite one or two people aboard, and so my grandson invited his dad and me aboard, and so we're sailing back to San Diego. I met two Marine pilots who had been flying the F-18 Hornet, and then they asked me, how did I come aboard? I'm talking about the landing signal officer, giving the different signals of the paddles and what have you, because we always came aboard by the paddles. And when I'm telling them that, these guys just looked at me and says, you know, you guys were nuts.
Well, that's part of why I'm doing this. I mentioned a little bit about the Fighter Pilot podcast, and I've been in contact with Jello the past couple of days, and I had approached him on, hey, we need to get some aviators from an earlier time. And at that time, he was going, I've got my projects I'm working on. I'm kind of running as fast as I can. And I knew you, and forgive me, I needed to get my button gear. But this thing with the Tiger Cruise. So the Tiger Cruises, when you did it, that was back in maybe the mid-'60s?
When
you did a Tiger Cruise?
No, I did the Tiger Cruise in 2011.
2011?
Yeah.
Wow. And as you say, forgive me, I want to say there's gentlemen like you that kind of made the foundation for the gentlemen like them. You kind of said, and like with the Dick Hermans and the Frank Hearns of the world, we learn from our parents, and hopefully we make things a little bit better.
Well, one thing too is that you mentioned two former Navy pilots who had been docents on the ship. They are the greatest generation. And when you start thinking back into the different wars that we've had, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and then in Iraq, each of those is different. And the missions for the different types of pilots differ. I actually think that those of us that flew strictly in Korea had it easy compared to World War II. Because in World War II in the South Pacific, your landing strip was always moving into different areas. You had to navigate. You also had to watch out for Japanese Zeros attacking you. You had to concentrate on all these ships that were firing at you anytime you close by. Whereas in Korea, we Navy pilots really didn't have to concentrate about being intercepted by the MiGs, except at the very beginning of the war when they got involved with it a little bit. We didn't have to worry about SAMs, surface-to-air missile, shooting at us in Korea. In Vietnam, that's when the missiles came about, and that's why so many of the Navy pilots actually were shot down because of the missiles, and they were captured and put in
the Hanoi Hilton.
Yeah, and so things have changed. I really feel that I was fortunate enough to fly in Korea, and my missions only lasted an hour and a half, and I had good food, warm comfort things, and we were not the heroes at all. The heroes were the men on the ground and who we were trying to support.
Yeah. So another one of the things that to me is a challenge is I have actually at the Castle Air Museum cleaned up a Allison, I believe it was a J33 centrifugal flow gas turbine, and it was a variant of, I want to say, either the Rolls-Royce Nene or Tay that was in the F9F, and I want to say jet engines of that vintage had a lag time between when you gave it throttle and when you got the power. And I was told, at least for the early axial flow gas turbines, it could be upwards of 10 to 13 seconds. Were you always, I think he said that there were speed brakes on board the Panther, so you could keep power up on the engine, and you might control your airspeed more with the speed brakes, but basically you did not get behind the power curve on this type of engine.
The time when you had to be concerned about if you're coming in to a landing, and on both the Panther and the Cougar, I tried to come aboard approximately 122 knots. Okay, supposing you're coming in there and he starts to give you, it looks like he's going to give you the cut, and then if you've eased off just a little bit, but then you see, I have to wave off. If you add full power, there is a definite delay when it would kick right on. And so I think that that power surge, or the lack of the surge, was really only crucial during the landing phase of it.
One other thing I wanted to touch on here, and Lord knows I've got more questions, but in your 8mm films that you shot and what's currently up on YouTube, you had mentioned that one of your best friends aboard the carrier flew an F4U Corsair. Was that during Korea, and were they flying a different type of mission?
They were flying basically the same type of mission. Julie was in VF-94, the 4th Squadron in Air Group 9. I flew the Panther in VF-91, the first squadron in Air Group 9. You have to realize that during Korea, and I imagine during Vietnam probably the same thing, is that most air groups were made up basically of 4 squadrons. They would have 1 or 2 fighter squadrons and 1 or 2 attack squadrons. In Air Group 9, we had VF-91, a Panther, VF-93, a Panther, VF-94, the F-4U Corsair, and VA-95 flew the Avenger, Douglas Avenger. Then there was what we call composite squadrons. And those things, there was 4 types. You had the night fighters that I talked about earlier. You had all-weather flight, anti-submarine, ASW, and you had the photo squadrons. And those squadrons maybe only had about 5 pilots in them, whereas the main squadrons that I was talking about, the 4 squadrons, had approximately 20 to 22 pilots in there. So anyhow, the Corsair flew the same type of missions that we did. They carried a different ordnance, naturally. They could carry napalm, which we never carried on the Panther.
Okay. May I ask, while you were, should I call it the Korean theater? I want to say in World War II there was the European theater and I want to say the South Pacific theater. Well, at any rate, when you were in Korea, did you either see or hear any barrages from battleships or cruisers?
Never.
Never? Okay.
Well, because what happened is that the task force was made up of 3 or 4 Essex-class carriers. And then it would have maybe 1 or 2 battleships with us, a cruiser, and a number of destroyers. And we were stationed out, like I said, about 100 miles. We would go up and down, staying in basically the same place. It would have to head into the wind when we were launching or when we were recovering aircraft. Well, if the wind is blowing from the west and we are to the east of Korea, when we're launching, now the task force is heading right towards land. So once they have launched the aircraft, they turn around and they get back so they can come back to recover or there. So, but they were basically in the same place. And what was good about that is that at that time, the ships, we had an ADF on our plane, automatic direction finder. We would tune in the frequency, and in front of you would be like a clock with an arrow. And if it's pointing at 12 o'clock, you're flying straight ahead to get to it. If it's over at your 10 o'clock position, you turn to the left so that it would come pointing straight up. And that's why we had it easy, because they didn't have that in World War II. And these guys are doing navigation, and they had to navigate while they were flying, so we had it easy.
I'm going to digress here a little bit with another story I have from the Castle Air Museum, and that was with World War II. When the Japanese were attacking Pearl Harbor, they were tracking in on Hawaii using that system. We in aviation know it as an ADF, or automatic direction finding, and they were tracking in on a radio broadcast station that was probably playing music or the news or what have you. Well, I removed what's called a stable platform of an inertial guidance system from a former supersonic, former thermonuclear tipped cruise missile called the Hound Dog. And I did buy from eBay a Coleman Astral tracker that would look at the stars, and it would pass the latitude and longitude based on the stars through to the missile, and then the missile would go off and fly. And the reason I did that was this month is the 50th anniversary of this aircraft carrier picking up the second mission of man to walk on the moon, Apollo 12. And the reason I did this was to essentially show kids, that I call them now because I'm getting older, essentially how we navigated to the moon. But forgive that digression. Let's go, at least for now, a little bit after Korea. After Korea, you did a world tour. By any chance, do you have any sort of stories like, taking your Panther past a Egyptian pyramid or any stories possibly like that?
I was involved in two things that I remember. Number one, I was the section leader of this particular flight. You have the flight leader and his wingman, and then I was the next one in charge. I was the section leader, and I had a wingman. And our flight leader was a full lieutenant, a senior lieutenant, and he thought he was Joe Top Gun. And so our flight was called Tiger Flight because we were going to be the Tigers. On one mission, I don't know if it was a Combat Air Patrol or what have you, but we were close to China. We were patrolling between Formosa, now Taiwan, and China. And Jack, Tiger 1, led us over Communist China. He was hoping to draw the MiGs up because he wanted us to get into battle. Boy, our eyeballs were going every which way. And I don't know if there was any complaint from China about a flight going over there, but my feet were dry. I was definitely over China. So that was one thing. The other thing is that Hainan Island is a large island southeast of China. And in 1954, a small British airliner was shot down by communist Chinese. So both carriers, I was on the Hornet at that time, and the Phil C, the one that I had been on in Korea, was also there. Both carriers sent out search and rescue things. And so Tiger Flight, we were on one of the search and rescues, and we didn't find anybody. But it so happened that a ship picked up survivors from that, and the next day after that occurred, 2 AD pilots from the Phil C were intercepted by 2 communist planes, and our planes prevailed. We shot down both. We thought this was going to be the start of World War II. So anyhow, Life magazine got a hold of this because the admiral was on board our carrier. And what they did is that they flew over the 2 pilots from the Phil C, came over to the Hornet to be interviewed by the admiral of what was going on. Well, Life had sent a photographer out, and he's going around and taking pictures. Lo and behold, he passes by the Ready Room 1, the one I was in. We were being briefed for another flight, and they took that picture. Okay? 2 weeks later, it gets published in Life magazine. And boy, were the guys from the Phil C were really teed off, because they're the ones who had shot down the planes, and here pilots from the Hornet got credit by having their picture in the paper.
Now, I'm sure that the statute of limitations has gone with this, but the flying over China, that was back during the Korean War?
No, that was afterwards. The Korean War was over 27 July 1953. This happened in 54 on the Round the World cruise.
Ah!
Okay.
Wow. Well, as I say, the statute of limitation, don't need to worry about that. So, I think you mentioned you had over 190 traps. Over 190 traps.
192.
192. And your approximate number of flight hours is?
Just under 1,000.
And please do not slap me when I ask this question, but did you have a call sign?
Not really. Other than being on the Hornet, I was Tiger 3, which is the second guy in charge. But my last name is Berven, Berven, and my dad was known, he was a teacher in Oakland, a coach, he was known as Berv, and I started having that. And so my squadron guys called me Berv, but we didn't get all of these crazy call signs that the pilots have now. We'd call people by their name.
Yeah, one of the stories I've heard on this Fighter Pilot podcast, one of the his call sign was Sue, TSU, and apparently one time he landed, and for whatever reason he ended up canopy down, landing gear up, and the Sue was short for this side up.
Okay.
And they painted that on the rail, and there was a little arrow pointing up. And as you know, naval aviators and apparently Air Force have call signs now.
Yeah.
But you, forgive me again, you were in the age before call signs. Right. Now, one other question I'm going to ask you that hopefully, forgive me, you won't slap me upside the head. But when I started being a docent on board the Hornet, I learned about a book called Panthers Over Korea. And the gentleman who wrote that book had written an account of how, in his day, he was flying Panther jets with a mixture of oil and aviation gasoline as fuel. By any chance, do you recall that? And let me go
by reading in the book. We had jet fuel.
Yeah.
Because we flew in 1953. You're talking about when jets first came out in 1950, and they did not have jet fuel at that time.
Well, one of the things he had mentioned in the book was that we were kind of caught off guard. And so, according to this gentleman, and I've forgotten the name of the author right now, but I can look it up, they had deployed the carrier Antietam, and at that time, they had not plumbed the carriers to carry jet fuel yet.
That's right.
Yet they were being deployed off to with jet fighters. So a little bit of the story here, just to let you know, and I'll finish it up with a little bit of the punchline, that they were flying F9F Panthers using a mixture of oil and aviation gasoline because the carrier hadn't been plumbed to carry jet fuel yet. And the author noted it was like flying with one hand tied behind his back, and that every fourth day they would go back into a friendly area and do an at-sea replenishment. And during that day, the aviation, I'll say the engine mechanics would be cleaning the fuel filters and the fuel distributor and things like that. And when I read that in the book, I'm kind of going, oh my God. And when I mentioned that to you and Jim Long, and I was forgive me, a young punk kid aboard the Hornet, I kind of got the impression that the two of you were going to have me walk the plank and that I didn't have a clue. But I gave you a copy of the book, and I do remember the one comment you had said about the book was, wow, this was written by a gentleman in a class just ahead of me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I redeemed my sins, but I'm still trying to redeem my sins. But that, it just, was another really interesting story because, yes, the engine didn't have the power it would have with jet fuel, and, what these men did.
Something that we haven't discussed, but I think it should be. When I'm talking to people here, especially the students, I said, when I was flying back in the early 50s, we did not have TVs. In fact, my parents received their first TV set for home usage when I was in the 11th grade. We didn't have pocket calculators. We had the old-fashioned slide rule. We did not have cell phones or iPhones.
Or smartphones.
Yeah,
Smart in quotes.
We did not have GPS satellite. And guess what? We did not have computers. And I ask the kids, what would you do if your parent took away your computer? Half of them go,
Yes.
they don't know. And I says, hey, we did without all of this electronic improvements, but we survived. We did the best that we could. And this holds true because I did not have radar in the Panther or the Cougar, which they have now. For navigation, we had to use the old-fashioned way, using charts and radio beacons. It's just amazing with how much electronics has changed. But still, without those, back then, we survived.
Okay. Now, I currently have about another 10 minutes worth of tape here, and I've got like 5 hours worth of tape. But to wrap up this section of the interview, and then maybe we'll go into some detail on your book if you'd like, or not your book, but your maps used in Korea and the like. But then there was life after Korea. Now, I know your beautiful wife, Joanne. Did you know Joanne before?
No.
So you met afterwards?
Well, in a way I knew her because her mom, before her mom got married, was a fellow worker, or a woman worker with my mom who was married. And the interesting thing is, when I was born, my dad passed Dorothy, my future mother-in-law, off as a sister from Spokane, Washington, and Dorothy saw me. It was the first person other than the nurses, the doctor, and my parents. And then did she know that I was going to be her son-in-law. And so I got out of the Navy in January of 55. I still had a 1 year of college to go to graduate and to get my teaching credential. And I started teaching at Castro Valley High School here in the East Bay. And I was in education as a teacher, a coach, athletic director, and administrator for 33 years. Well, I started teaching in 56. I actually met Joanne, who had been nursing and came back, and my mom invited Joanne over for dinner, and that was my downfall. That was in 58, and we got married in December of 58. Of all things, here I am, a football coach, assistant football coach. And we got married on a Sunday, December 28th, 1958. If you look, you'll see that was the NFL championship game between the Baltimore Colts and the New York Giants that sort of went into overtime. Alan Amici for the Colts scored, and they won the championship. Went into overtime, and the priest who was marrying us was a football nut too. And we were in the back there, and Joanne was afraid that we were going to be late for the wedding. So anyhow, That's and
So,
then
so the two of you have been married now for over about 61 years?
it'll be 61 years, yeah, in another month. And then I retired from teaching in '89. I was a substitute administrator for 2 other high schools for 1 semester each. And then in 1998, when this ship opened, I became a docent, and I've been a docent here for 21 years.
And you didn't continue to fly after Korea?
No. I did after Korea because I had the flights in 1954 until January of '55. After I got out, I wanted to check to see the old squadron that I was in at Naval Air Station Oakland, what they were flying. And so they had some open billets, so I was about ready to sign up to be in a reserve squadron. But I asked them, what kind of plane are you flying? They were flying the F9F Banshee. Unfortunately, the Banshee was a good plane, but it had some problems with flameouts. And I started thinking, Dale, you had 90 missions over Korea. You had 192 carrier landings. Why do you want to go fly a reserve plane when the plane captain would be possibly as stupid as I was? So I didn't do it, partially for that, but also I was in such a hurry to get my teaching credential that I couldn't spend the time on the weekends, and especially summer vacation, going to summer school. I couldn't go on their 2-week cruises because I wanted to get my credential.
Okay, so this part, I'm still analog. I'm shooting digital video, and I'm down to like my last 5 minutes of tape now. But I do have more tape and more batteries. But forgive me at this point. I'm going to come to the part where I'm going to say that I think Jimmy Doolittle wrote a book entitled something to the effect of, I have been so lucky. And although, like everyone, you've had your hard times, but you've really had a pretty good life.
For being almost 90. Yeah, I had a aortic valve replacement. I've had a pacemaker, but I can still go ahead and lead tours going up and down the ladders. I just go a little bit slower.
Yeah.
I'm still driving. My eyesight is good. I'm still married to the same woman, and she's doing well. So I've been lucky.
Okay. Well, with this, at least this part of it, I want to say thank you very much. It's been wonderful. I have a vision of this tape and how it's going to look when it's done, and I hope it's as nice as the vision is.
In the other portion, I was talking about we did not have the electronics. We had to use the old-fashioned way of navigation. Well, just imagine pilots in our squadron. This is my actual chart book right here. And there are 24 pages. And so on this cover, you can't quite see it, but there's an outline of all of Korea, and it's broken down into different sections. All right, now when we were briefing for a flight, the air intelligence officer would come in and they would give each of us in the flight a target photo. And here is a typical target photo right here in North Korea. On this target photo, there'd be a series of coordinates on that point. So anyhow, what we would do is to check to see where this target photo was. We would look into here, and that target photo is on this section here. Just imagine trying to fly a plane with this cumbersome thing on your lap. Well, you could fold it in half, because the target photo that I have right here could be found in this area up here. Notice, let me go to this target photo again. When I became a docent, they knew that I had this target book and the target photo. So I went to Kinko's and they had these blow-ups. So here is your actual target photo and the blow-up. All right, now, this page here is that one up there. So, and here are those coordinates. It says CU 645543. Well, the C would have been on this other page, but here is the U up here, and then each of these numbers right here. Think of a 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, going vertically and horizontally. Don't confuse it with latitude and longitude. It's just in the sectors. Well, CU 645, I'm going to take the first three numbers, 645. We're working from left to right. Here is the 600, 645 would be just about halfway. You'd put an imaginary vertical line. The last three, 543, 543, once again, almost halfway up, put a horizontal line. Where they intersected, would that be point right there? So you would fly in using the chart book, and when you came close to this and you could recognize these islands, then you folded the chart book up and you referred to this target photo, which would be on your thigh pad. That's how we did it. And when you're going way inland and you don't have the contrast between the water and the land, it does make it difficult. Korea has terrible winter weather, storms, snow. So if you were flying during the winter time and snow is on the ground, everything is white. You can't tell where the roads are or that. Once again, we did the best that we could.
And so in modern times now, as you said, we have GPS. And not only can you use GPS in the aircraft, but you can also put it potentially on the bomb.
Right.
But in your day, forgive me, one ridge could look a lot like another bridge. And especially if you're flying over territory, denied territory that you've never flown over before, there might not be a landmark like Lake Tahoe that's really obvious. I mean, this ridge looks like this ridge, and as you say, you did the best you can, and, forgive me, you did a very good job of it.
Oh, well, we tried to do good things.